Isabella, a young Hispanic American woman, had to drop out of school to work as a janitor. While she was cleaning at a prestigious medical university, she was harshly scolded by a professor, his angry shouts echoing throughout the entire campus. The reason: Isabella had correctly named and explained the uses of several complex medical instruments, despite never having attended a single day of medical school. However, because of her skin color and ethnicity, she was treated terribly. Let's listen to the whole story to better understand what happened to Isabella and how everything will eventually unfold. The gentle rays of dawn filtered through the worn curtains of the small apartment in East Los Angeles. Isabella Reyes, just 17, quietly moved about the cramped kitchen, careful not to wake her younger siblings still asleep in the adjacent room. Her mother, Elena, had already left for her first cleaning job of the day, and her father, Miguel, was working the night shift at the factory across town. Isabella placed a pot of rice on the stove, making sure there would be enough for her siblings' lunch, then gathered her backpack. High school graduation was only 2 months away, but thoughts of college seemed like distant dreams that belonged to others. Dreams that required money her family simply didn't have. "Isa, you're leaving already." Her 12-year-old sister, Lucia, appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Sí, pequeña, I have to catch the early bus," Isabella replied, giving her sister a quick hug. "Make sure Diego and Carmen eat before school, okay? And don't forget your math homework." Lucia nodded, already accustomed to these morning instructions. Ever since their mother had taken on a second job, Isabella had become the family's second caretaker, a role she embraced with quiet determination. The bus ride to school was long, giving her time to flip through her worn copy of Fundamentals of Biology. Science had always fascinated Isabella, particularly human anatomy. While her classmates complained about dissection labs, she found herself enthralled, wondering about the miraculous inner workings of the human body. "You should be a doctor," her biology teacher, Mr. Ramirez, had once told her after she'd scored highest on the semester exam. She'd laughed then, though the comment had planted a seed deep within her heart, a seed that would remain dormant for years to come. 3 months after graduation, Isabella stood before the imposing glass entrance of Westridge Medical University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. But she wasn't there to study, she was there for a job interview, as a member of the maintenance staff. "Cleaning experience?" the supervisor, Mrs. Winters, asked, glancing over her application. "Yes, ma'am. I've helped my mother with her cleaning jobs since I was 12, Isabella replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nervousness. Mrs. Winters looked up, her eyes softening slightly. 7 years of experience then, and you graduated high school with honors?" "Yes, ma'am. Overqualified for janitorial work," Mrs. Winters muttered, then spoke louder. "The work is hard, Miss Reyes. Long hours, not much recognition. But it's steady, and the benefits are good. Can you start on Monday?" Isabella nodded, relief washing over her. The pay was better than she'd expected, enough to help her family and perhaps save a little. "I can start right away." "Good. Report here at 5 a.m. We clean the facilities before the students and faculty arrive." On her way out, Isabella paused in the grand atrium of the medical school, gazing up at the portraits of distinguished alumni and faculty members. Their faces were mostly white, mostly male, all wearing the same confident expressions of people who had never questioned their right to be there. "Someday," she whispered to herself, not even daring to complete the thought. The first few weeks at Westridge Medical University were a blur of early mornings, aching muscles, and the steady rhythm of mopping, dusting, and sanitizing. Isabella learned the layout of the sprawling campus, the teaching hospitals, research labs, lecture halls, and libraries. She learned which professors were messy, Dr. Harrington from biochemistry, which were meticulous, Dr. Sterling from surgery, and which were kind enough to acknowledge her presence with a smile or a thank you, Professor Alcott from anatomy. Most importantly, she learned when spaces would be empty, creating pockets of opportunity in her tightly scheduled day. It began innocently enough. While cleaning the anatomy lab one evening, Isabella noticed an open textbook left on a table. The page displayed a detailed diagram of the human heart, its chambers and valves labeled in precise terminology. Fascinated, she allowed herself 5 minutes, just 5, to study the diagram before continuing her work. Those 5 minutes became a ritual. A few minutes in the library during her lunch break, a half hour in an empty lecture hall after her shift, listening to recorded lectures that professors made available to their students online. Soon, Isabella found herself carrying a small notebook, jotting down terms and concepts she didn't understand, researching them later at the public library near her home. 3 months into her employment, Isabella was cleaning the simulation lab when she heard voices approaching. Quickly, she moved her cart against the wall, making herself as inconspicuous as possible. "I still think the cadaver lab provides a more authentic experience," said a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. Isabella recognized her as Dr. Margaret Sterling, head of the surgical department and one of the most respected and feared figures at Westridge. "Perhaps, Margaret, but not all students process information the same way. Some need this intermediate step," replied Professor Richard Alcott, a kind-faced man in his 60s who taught anatomy. "Besides, these new models are remarkably accurate." Isabella continued mopping, keeping her eyes down as the professors moved past her toward the center of the room where various medical instruments were arranged on trays. They were discussing a demonstration for first-year students the following day. "The problem remains that students aren't learning proper instrument handling," Dr. Sterling was saying. "Last week, I had a resident who couldn't distinguish between a Kelly forceps and a—" Her words were cut short by the sound of metal clattering against the floor. Professor Alcott had accidentally knocked over a tray of surgical instruments. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Richard," Dr. Sterling said with obvious irritation. "I'm sorry, I'll pick them up," Professor Alcott said, bending down with some difficulty. Isabella immediately set down her mop and hurried over. "Let me help you, sir." She knelt beside the professor, carefully gathering the scattered instruments. Without thinking, she began arranging them on the tray, grouping similar tools together. "These are the hemostats for clamping blood vessels," she said quietly, placing several clamp-like instruments in a neat row. "And these are retractors for holding tissues apart during surgery." She continued organizing the instruments, naming each one correctly as she placed it on the tray. Only when she finished did she notice the silence in the room, and look up to find both professors staring at her with identical expressions of surprise. "Where did you learn that?" Professor Alcott asked, his voice gentle but curious. Isabella felt her cheeks flush. "I sometimes read the medical books when I cleaned the library," she admitted. "And I've seen these instruments being used in the surgical videos the students watch." "You're familiar with surgical procedures?" Dr. Sterling asked, her tone incredulous. "Just what I've read and seen in the videos, ma'am," Isabella replied, suddenly aware that she might have overstepped. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Professor Alcott said, studying her with new interest. "What's your name?" "Isabella Reyes, sir." "Well, Miss Reyes, you have quite an impressive knowledge of surgical instruments for someone with no formal training." Dr. Sterling frowned slightly. "Yes, quite unusual. In any case, we should continue our preparations, Richard." She moved away, clearly dismissing Isabella from her thoughts. But Professor Alcott remained, his kind eyes assessing Isabella thoughtfully. "How long have you been studying medical texts, Miss Reyes?" "A few months, sir. I hope it's not a problem." "A problem? No, he said, smiling. "Knowledge is never a problem, it's a gift." He glanced at the tray of perfectly arranged instruments. "You have a good eye and it seems a good memory." Isabella nodded, unsure how to respond. "Our department could use a technical assistant in the anatomy lab," Professor Alcott said suddenly. "Someone to help prepare materials for demonstrations, maintain equipment, that sort of thing. It would be a step up from maintenance work. Would that interest you?" Isabella's heart raced. "Yes, sir, very much." "Good. I'll speak to administration about it." He smiled again. "And perhaps next time, you might share what else you've been learning." As Isabella watched him walk away with Dr. Sterling, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, the position of technical assistant in the anatomy lab, came with a modest pay increase and a schedule that allowed Isabella to continue her self-education. Instead of cleaning classrooms at night, she now prepared cadavers and anatomical models for Professor Alcott's lectures, sterilized equipment, and organized supplies. Most importantly, she was now officially allowed, encouraged, even to learn. "These are the resources for my first-year anatomy students," Professor Alcott told her, showing her the online portal where lectures, reading materials, and practice exams were stored. "Feel free to use them. If you have questions, my door is always open." Isabella threw herself into her studies with a passion that surprised even her. She devoured textbooks on anatomy, physiology, and pathology. She practiced identifying structures on the anatomical models after hours. She listened to recorded lectures while helping to prepare the lab for classes. But her new position wasn't without challenges. While Professor Alcott treated her with respect, many others did not. Some students glanced at her with surprise when they found her reading medical texts during her breaks. Others ignored her completely, as if she were just another piece of equipment in the lab. And then there was Dr. Sterling. "I see Alcott has taken in another stray," she remarked one day, finding Isabella meticulously labeling specimens in the lab. "I hope you realize, girl, that there's a vast difference between memorizing names of body parts and actually understanding medicine." Isabella kept her expression neutral. "Yes, Dr. Sterling. Professor Alcott has a soft heart. He likes to encourage everyone, even when encouragement is misplaced." She picked up one of the labeled specimens, examining it critically. "This work is adequate, I suppose." "Thank you, ma'am." Dr. Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Don't thank me for adequate. In medicine, adequate means someone might die who shouldn't have." She set down the specimen. "If you truly want to learn, you should aim much higher than adequate." After she left, Isabella carefully relabeled every specimen, making sure each tag was perfect. That night, she stayed 3 hours past her shift to reread the chapter on tissue samples, determined to understand not just the what, but the why. 6 months into her new position, Isabella approached Professor Alcott with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Professor, do you think someone like me could ever become a doctor?" They were in his office, where Isabella had been helping organize research papers. Professor Alcott removed his reading glasses, regarding her thoughtfully. "Someone like you? You mean someone intelligent, dedicated, and hard-working?" "Absolutely," his voice softened. "But I suspect that's not really what you're asking." Isabella's eyes dropped to her hands. "I meant, someone from my background. My family immigrated from Mexico when I was 5. We don't have much money. I didn't go to college." "Ah." Professor Alcott leaned back in his chair. "The path would certainly be challenging. You'd need to complete undergraduate prerequisites before applying to medical school. That's at least 4 years of education, followed by 4 years of medical school, then residency. It's a long, expensive road." Isabella nodded, feeling a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. But Professor Alcott continued, "It's not impossible. There are scholarships, financial aid programs, and you have something many applicants lack: real experience and a genuine passion for medicine." "Dr. Sterling doesn't think I belong here," Isabella said quietly. Professor Alcott smiled. "Margaret Sterling was born into a family of physicians. She's never had to question her place in these halls. But some of the best doctors I've known came from backgrounds similar to yours. They brought a perspective and empathy that can't be taught in classrooms." He opened a drawer and pulled out a pamphlet. "The university has a special admissions program for non-traditional students. It includes evening classes for prerequisites. I've been meaning to give you this." Isabella took the pamphlet with trembling hands. "It won't be easy," Professor Alcott warned. "You'll face barriers, some visible, others less so. But if this is what you truly want, Isabella, I believe you can do it." For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to speak her dream aloud. "I want to be a doctor." Professor Alcott nodded, as if he'd known all along. "Then that's what you'll become." Chapter 4. Against the current, the next 2 years were the hardest of Isabella's life. She continued working full-time at the medical school, while taking evening classes to complete her prerequisites for medical school. Her days began at 4:30 a.m. and often ended past midnight, leaving precious little time for sleep, let alone a social life. Her family both supported and worried about her. "Mija, you're pushing yourself too hard," her mother said one Sunday when Isabella fell asleep at the dinner table. "You need to rest." "I'm fine, Mama," Isabella insisted, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. Her younger siblings, now teenagers, looked up to her with a mixture of pride and awe. Diego, at 15, had started talking about becoming a doctor himself one day. "If Isa can do it, so can I," he'd declare, his chest puffing with newfound ambition. At the university, Isabella's position had evolved. Professor Alcott had recommended her for a role as an undergraduate teaching assistant in the anatomy lab, which provided tuition assistance for her prerequisite courses. It also meant she now interacted regularly with medical students and faculty, a mixed blessing. "Miss Reyes, could you please demonstrate the proper dissection technique for the brachial plexus?" Professor Alcott asked during a first-year lab session. Isabella stepped forward confidently, having practiced this particular dissection many times. "Of course. The brachial plexus is a network of nerves that originate from the spinal cord and supply the upper limb. When dissecting, we need to be careful to preserve the complex branching pattern." She worked methodically, her hands steady, her explanations clear. The students watched with interest, some taking notes on her technique. "Excellent demonstration, Miss Reyes," Professor Alcott said when she finished. "Couldn't have done it better myself." As the students moved to their own stations to practice, Isabella overheard a whispered conversation. "Isn't she the one who used to clean the labs?" a male student asked. "Yeah, apparently she's trying to become a doctor," his lab partner replied with a snicker. "Talk about social climbing. Well, she's good at dissection, I'll give her that. But there's more to medicine than cutting up dead bodies." Isabella pretended not to hear, but the words stung. Still, she reminded herself of what Professor Alcott had told her early on. Medicine is ultimately a meritocracy. Prove your worth through your work, and eventually, even the skeptics will come around. Not all interactions were negative. Some students, particularly those from backgrounds similar to hers, sought her out for help and encouragement. "I'm the first in my family to go to college," confided Maria, a quiet first-year medical student. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." "I understand that feeling," Isabella replied, "but you earned your place here just like everyone else. How do you do it? Work and study, and still seem so determined." Isabella thought about this. "I remember why I'm doing this, not just for myself, but for my family, my community, for everyone who never got the chance." Maria nodded slowly. "I've seen how some of the others treat you, especially Dr. Sterling. She's brutal." Dr. Sterling had indeed become a particular challenge in Isabella's journey. The distinguished surgeon seemed to take personal offense at Isabella's ambitions, often making pointed remarks about knowing one's place and the dangers of aspirations exceeding abilities. One afternoon, as Isabella was preparing to take the MCAT, the entrance exam for medical school, Dr. Sterling entered the lab, where she was studying during her break. "Ah, Miss Reyes, I heard you're planning to apply to medical school," she said, her voice cool. "Yes, Dr. Sterling. I'm taking the MCAT next month." A noble ambition. Dr. Sterling picked up Isabella's practice exam, scanning it critically. "Though I wonder if you've considered the realities of medical training. It's not just about knowledge, it's about background, connections, cultural fit." Isabella met her gaze steadily. "I believe medicine should be about healing, not background." Dr. Sterling's lips thinned. "Idealism, how charming." She set down the practice exam. "Let me be frank, Miss Reyes. Medicine is an elite profession with standards that have been established over centuries. Not everyone is suited for it, regardless of how many books they read or tests they pass. With all due respect, Dr. Sterling, I believe in letting my work speak for itself." "Indeed? Well, your work so far has been acceptable for a lab assistant." She paused. "But medical school is another matter entirely. The competition is fierce. Only the most exceptional candidates succeed." Isabella straightened her shoulders. "Then I'll have to be exceptional, Doctor." Sterling's eyes flashed, confidence bordering on arrogance, a common mistake among those who don't understand the challenges ahead. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "I sit on the admissions committee, Miss Reyes. Just something to keep in mind." After she left, Isabella sat motionless, her heart pounding. The implicit threat was clear, but so was her resolve. If she needed to be exceptional, then exceptional she would be. The day Isabella received her MECAT scores, she stood alone in her tiny apartment, hands shaking as she opened the email. The number that appeared on the screen seemed impossible. 520 out of 528, placing her in the 98th percentile nationwide. She called Professor Alcott immediately. "I knew you could do it," he said, his voice warm with pride. "With scores like these and your unique background, you have a strong chance at admission, even here at Westridge." Even with Dr. Sterling on the committee, Professor Alcott sighed. "Margaret is just one voice of many, and contrary to what you might think, she respects merit. Your scores will speak volumes." Isabella's application to Westridge Medical School included her outstanding MECAT scores, glowing letters of recommendation, including one from Professor Alcott, and a compelling personal statement that detailed her journey from cleaning staff to aspiring physician. When interview day arrived, she wore a carefully saved fursuit and carried the confidence of someone who had already overcome countless obstacles. The interview panel consisted of 5 faculty members, including Professor Alcott and, as expected, Dr. Sterling. "Miss Reyes," Dr. Sterling began, "your academic credentials are impressive, particularly given your unconventional background. But medicine requires more than test scores. It requires judgment, poise under pressure, and an understanding of complex social dynamics. How do you respond to the concern that your background might leave you unprepared for these aspects of the profession?" Isabella took a deep breath before responding. "Dr. Sterling, I believe my background is actually one of my greatest strengths. Growing up in an immigrant family, navigating between cultures, and working my way through education has taught me resilience, adaptability, and empathy. I've learned to function in environments where I was initially an outsider, to communicate across cultural and social boundaries, and to maintain composure under pressure." She paused, then continued with quiet confidence. "As for judgment, I believe good clinical judgment comes from a combination of knowledge, experience, and humility, the recognition that we must always be learning and growing. My path to this interview room has certainly taught me humility, but also the persistence to acquire knowledge despite obstacles." The room was silent for a moment. Professor Alcott smiled slightly, while Dr. Sterling's expression remained impassive. "A well-rehearsed answer, Doctor," Sterling said finally, "but medicine isn't about words, it's about actions under pressure. Tell me, Miss Reyes, what would you do if faced with a critical decision during surgery, where hesitation could mean death?" "I would rely on my training, consult with colleagues when possible, and act decisively based on the best available evidence," Isabella replied without hesitation. "And I would carry the responsibility of that decision, whatever the outcome." Doctor Sterling raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by the directness of the answer. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, with each panel member asking probing questions about Isabella's motivations, ethics, and understanding of medical challenges. Through it all, she maintained her composure, answering honestly and thoughtfully. As she left the interview room, Isabella felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. She had done her best. Now it was out of her hands. 3 weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. Isabella Reyes would be a member of Westridge Medical School's incoming class, the first former maintenance worker to be admitted in the institution's prestigious history. Isabella's first day of medical school was surreal. Standing in the grand auditorium, where the white coat ceremony would take place, she could hardly believe that she was now a student in the very institution where she had once cleaned floors. Her family occupied a row of seats near the front: her parents, her siblings, and her abuela, who had flown in from Mexico for the occasion. Their faces shone with pride and tears as they watched Isabella, along with 149 other students, prepare to don the short white coat that symbolized their entry into the medical profession. "The white coat is not just a uniform," the dean said in his opening address. "It is a symbol of the trust placed in you by society, of the knowledge you will acquire, and of the oath you will uphold. Wear it with humility and pride." As Isabella stepped onto the stage to receive her coat, she caught sight of Professor Alcott beaming from his place among the faculty. Dr. Sterling sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Professor Alcott stood to help Isabella into her white coat. "I told you you'd make it," he whispered as he adjusted the collar. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered back. That evening, at a small celebration dinner at her parents' apartment, Isabella's father raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To my daughter, who has shown us all that with determination and faith, mountains can be moved," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your abuelo would have been so proud to see you today, Isa. He always said you had healer's hands." Isabella smiled through her tears. "This is just the beginning, Papa. The hard part is still ahead." Her mother reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "But you won't face it alone, Mia. Never alone." Medical school proved to be every bit as demanding as Isabella had expected. The volume of information was overwhelming, the pace relentless. She studied anatomy, histology, biochemistry, and pathology, alongside classmates who had for the most part followed more traditional paths to medicine. Some, like her lab partner Kevin Chen, had been preparing for medical school since childhood, with parents who were themselves physicians. "My dad quizzed me on the bones of the hand when I was 8, Kevin told her as they labored over a cadaver dissection. "Pretty weird childhood when I think about it." Others, like Aisha Williams, had come to medicine after careers in other fields. "I was a high school science teacher for 6 years, Aisha explained during a late-night study session. "Loved it, but always felt the pull toward medicine." Isabella found herself forming bonds with these fellow students, united by their shared challenges and aspirations. Yet there were moments when she was reminded of her different background. "My family has a beach house in the Hamptons," said Tristan, a classmate, during a discussion about summer plans. "A bunch of us are going there to study for boards." "You should join us, Isabella." "Thanks, but I'll be working at the clinic in my neighborhood," she replied, not mentioning that a vacation was financially out of reach. "Working? During break?" Tristan looked genuinely confused. "You need to relax sometime, you know." Isabella smiled politely, but didn't explain further. The reality was that even with scholarships and loans, she still needed to work part-time to help support her family and cover her living expenses. As challenging as the academic workload was, Isabella found that her years of self-study had prepared her well. She excelled in anatomy, drawing on her experience in Professor Alcott's lab. Her clinical skills, taking patient histories, performing physical exams, were praised by instructors who noted her exceptional empathy and attention to detail. "You have a natural rapport with patients, Dr. Patel," her clinical skills instructor observed after watching Isabella interact with a standardized patient, especially those from underserved communities. "That can't be taught." But not all feedback was positive. During a surgical rotation in her 3rd year, Isabella found herself once again under Dr. Sterling's critical eye. "Miss Reyes, identify the structures you see here," Dr. Sterling demanded, during a laparoscopic appendectomy, pointing to the screen displaying the patient's abdominal cavity. "That's the cecum, and there's the appendix," Isabella replied confidently. "The inflamed appendix is adherent to the peritoneum due to the advanced infection. And what are the risks of proceeding with removal given what you see? The inflammation increases the risk of bleeding and perforation. There's also risk of injury to adjacent structures like the iliac vessels or ureter." Dr. Sterling nodded slightly. "Correct. Now tell me your approach." Isabella outlined her approach to the procedure, drawing on her reading and observations from previous surgeries. When she finished, Dr. Sterling was silent for a moment. "Not entirely wrong," she said finally, "though your technique would unnecessarily increase operative time. Efficiency matters in surgery, Miss Reyes. Every minute under anesthesia increases risk to the patient." Despite the criticism, Isabella noticed something different in Dr. Sterling's tone, a hint of professional respect that hadn't been there before. As her medical education progressed, Isabella found herself increasingly drawn to surgery. The precision, the immediate impact, the technical challenge, all appealed to her methodical mind and steady hands. When it came time to apply for residency, she set her sights on surgical programs, including Westridge's own highly competitive general surgery residency. "Are you sure about surgery?" Professor Alcott asked when she shared her decision. "It's one of the most demanding specialties, both physically and emotionally." "I'm sure," Isabella replied. "I want to be where I can make the most immediate difference. Margaret will be pleased," he said with a small smile, though she'd never admit it. Isabella looked at him in surprise. "Dr. Sterling, she's barely tolerated me all these years." Professor Alcott chuckled. "You don't know her as I do." Margaret Sterling's respect must be earned, not given. And in her own way, I believe she respects what you've accomplished. She has a strange way of showing it. Indeed, but watch carefully during your surgical rotation. Notice who she criticizes most thoroughly. Isabella did watch and gradually came to understand what Professor Alcott meant. Dr. Sterling's harshest critiques were reserved for those students she believed capable of excellence. Her indifference, not her criticism, was the true indicator of dismissal. On match day, when medical students across the country learn where they'll complete their residency training, Isabella stood with her classmates, clutching the envelope that would determine her future. On the count of 3, the dean announced, 1, 2, 3. Envelopes were torn open, followed by shouts of joy, sighs of relief, and occasional tears of disappointment. Isabella's hands trembled as she read the letter inside her envelope. Westridge Medical Center, General Surgery Residency Program. She had done it. 4 years after entering medical school as a former janitor, Isabella Reyes would be training as a surgeon at one of the most prestigious programs in the country. As the celebrations continued around her, Isabella felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Dr. Sterling standing behind her. "Congratulations, Dr. Reyes," she said formally. "I understand you'll be joining our surgical residency program." "Yes, Dr. Sterling. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The real work is just beginning." Dr. Sterling's expression remained serious, but Isabella detected something new in her eyes, a hint of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. "I expect excellence from my residents, nothing less." Isabella straightened her shoulders. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Dr. Sterling." For the first time in their long acquaintance, Dr. Sterling's lips curved in what might almost have been a smile. "Then we understand each other. Welcome to surgery, Dr. Reyes." Surgical residency was everything Isabella had been warned about, and more grueling hours, immense responsibility, and constant evaluation. As a first-year resident, an intern, she worked 80-hour weeks, often spending 36 hours straight at the hospital. She learned to catch sleep when she could, to eat quickly or not at all, and to function under a level of fatigue that would have once seemed impossible. Surgery isn't just a profession, Dr. Sterling told the new residents on their first day. It's a calling. It will demand everything you have, your time, your energy, your focus. If you're not willing to give those things, leave now. No one left. Isabella's days blurred together in a cycle of pre-rounds, surgeries, post-operative care, and on-call emergencies. She learned to place central lines, to close surgical wounds, to recognize the early signs of complications. She made mistakes, was corrected, improved, and made new mistakes. Through it all, Dr. Sterling remained a constant presence, demanding, critical, occasionally terrifying, but also undeniably brilliant. "No, Dr. Reyes, that's not how you tie that knot," she would say, taking over to demonstrate the proper technique. "Watch my hands. Precision matters. A loose knot means a bleeding patient. Or your assessment is incomplete. What about the patient's nutritional status? Albumin levels? Wound healing depends on these factors." The criticism was relentless but specific, always aimed at making Isabella a better surgeon rather than simply finding fault. Gradually, Isabella came to understand that this was Dr. Sterling's way of teaching, harsh but effective. Other attendings had different styles. Dr. Patel was gentle and encouraging, Dr. Washington used humor to make points, and Dr. Chen relied on detailed explanations. Isabella learned from all of them, but it was Dr. Sterling's approval she found herself seeking most. That approval came rarely, and in understated forms: a nod after a well-performed procedure, a slightly less critical evaluation, the assignment of more complex cases. Small acknowledgments that to Isabella meant more than effusive praise from others. As she advanced in her residency, Isabella's technical skills improved dramatically. Her hands, once nimble from years of cleaning and preparing specimens, became surgeons' hands, steady, precise, confident. She developed a reputation among the nursing staff as a resident who listened, who explained procedures clearly, and who never belittled questions. "Dr. Reyes actually treats us like team members," she overheard one nurse telling another. "Not like some of the others who act like we're just there to follow orders." Her rapport with patients was equally strong, particularly with those from backgrounds similar to her own. Her fluent Spanish was an asset in a hospital serving a diverse community, and her ability to explain complex medical concepts in accessible terms earned her the trust of patients and families. "You speak to us like people, doctora," an elderly patient told her after she'd explained an upcoming procedure. "Not like we're stupid because we don't know the fancy words." By her third year of residency, Isabella was performing increasingly complex surgeries under supervision. She had published 2 research papers on surgical outcomes in underserved communities and was beginning to be recognized as a rising star in the program. But not everyone appreciated her success. Dr. James Patterson, a fellow surgical resident who came from a long line of physicians, seemed to resent Isabella's growing reputation. "Must be nice to be the diversity pick," he muttered after Isabella was selected to assist Dr. Sterling in a complex hepatectomy. "Some of us had to earn our spots." Isabella had learned to let such comments slide off her back, but they still stung. Despite her accomplishments, there were still those who saw her as an outsider, a token of inclusion rather than a truly deserving colleague. Then came the case that would change everything. It began as a routine morning in the surgical intensive care unit. Isabella was checking on post-operative patients when a code blue was called for a patient who had undergone a Whipple procedure, one of the most complex abdominal surgeries, the day before. She rushed to the room to find the patient, Mr. Delgado, unresponsive with plummeting blood pressure. The signs pointed to massive internal bleeding, a dreaded complication of the procedure. "He needs to go back to the OR immediately," Isabella said, already starting the rapid response protocol. "Call Dr. Sterling." "She's in another emergency surgery," the charge nurse replied. "Dr. Patterson is on call." Minutes later, Dr. Patterson arrived, quickly assessing the situation. "We'll prep for surgery. Dr. Reyes, you'll assist." In the operating room, they found extensive bleeding from one of the major arterial anastomoses. Dr. Patterson worked to control the hemorrhage, but his movements seemed uncertain, his decisions delayed. "We need to place a vascular clamp here," Isabella suggested, pointing to the bleeding vessel. "I know what I'm doing, Dr. Reyes," Patterson snapped, though his hands were visibly shaking. As the patient's vital signs continued to deteriorate, Isabella made a decision. "Dr. Patterson, this patient is crashing. We need to control this bleeding now." When Patterson still hesitated, Isabella stepped in, gently moving him aside. "Let me place the clamp." Without waiting for permission, she skillfully placed the vascular clamp, immediately slowing the hemorrhage. "Suction here," she directed the scrub nurse. "And I need a 5-0 proline suture." With steady hands, Isabella began repairing the damaged vessel, working methodically despite the tension in the room. Dr. Patterson stood frozen, whether from shock or anger, Isabella couldn't tell, but her focus remained solely on the patient. "More suction," she instructed calmly. "BP stabilizing, heart rate coming down." By the time she placed the final suture, Mr. Delgado's vital signs had stabilized. The bleeding was controlled. "Let's close," she said, stepping back to allow Dr. Patterson to resume his role. He nodded stiffly, taking over the procedure without comment. The atmosphere in the operating room was thick with unspoken tension, but Isabella's only concern was for the patient. Later, as she was completing her post-operative notes, Dr. Patterson approached her in the charting room. "You undermined me in there," he said, his voice low but angry. "You had no right to take over." Isabella looked up from her computer. "The patient was dying, Dr. Patterson. I did what was necessary. You should have waited for my direction. I'm the senior resident." With all due respect, there wasn't time to wait. Isabella kept her voice calm. "I made a judgment call. I stand by it." Patterson leaned closer. "This isn't the barrio, Reyes. There are protocols, hierarchies. Maybe in your world, you just do whatever you want, but here, Dr. Patterson." The sharp voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Both residents turned to see Dr. Sterling standing in the doorway, her expression thunderous. "My office, now, both of you." In Dr. Sterling's austere office, Isabella and Patterson stood like chastened students as the senior surgeon reviewed the case notes. "Dr. Patterson," Dr. Sterling finally said, looking up from the file. "You were the senior resident on call. Why did Dr. Reyes have to take over the procedure?" Patterson straightened defensively. "She didn't have to. She chose to overstep her role. The patient was hemorrhaging. Isabella interjected. The anastomosis was failing, and immediate action was needed. So you decided to usurp Dr. Patterson's authority. Dr. Sterling's gaze was piercing. Isabella met her eyes steadily. I decided to save the patient's life. Dr. Sterling was silent for a long moment. Dr. Patterson, you're dismissed. We'll discuss your performance separately. After Patterson left, Isabella remained standing, prepared for the reprimand she expected would follow. Instead, Dr. Sterling's tone softened marginally. Sit down, Dr. Reyes. Isabella took the chair across from Dr. Sterling's desk, her heart still racing from the confrontation. You placed yourself in a difficult position today, Dr. Sterling said. Hierarchies exist in surgery for good reasons: order, clarity of command, accountability. I understand that, Dr. Sterling, but my first duty is to the patient. Indeed. Dr. Sterling studied her carefully. Tell me, what would you have done if your intervention had failed? If the patient had died while you were, as Dr. Patterson put it, overstepping? Isabella considered the question honestly. I would have accepted full responsibility. It was my decision to intervene. And if the patient had died while you were following Dr. Patterson's lead, I would have regretted not acting sooner. Dr. Sterling nodded slowly. You showed good judgment today, Dr. Reyes, and considerable technical skill. The repair you performed was adequate. Coming from Dr. Sterling, this was high praise. Thank you, Dr. Sterling. Don't thank me yet. Dr. Sterling closed the file. You'll face consequences for this. Dr. Patterson's family has connections within this institution. There will be those who view your actions as insubordination rather than initiative. Isabella had expected as much, but the reality still stung. I understand. Do you? Dr. Sterling's gaze was penetrating. Medicine is not just about technical skill, Dr. Reyes. It's also about navigating systems that were not designed with people like you in mind. For once, there was no condescension in her tone when she said people like you, just a statement of fact. I've been navigating those systems my whole life, Isabella replied quietly. Yes, I suppose you have. Dr. Sterling seemed to be considering something. There's a complex hepatectomy scheduled for tomorrow. Dr. Patterson was supposed to assist, but I think you'll be more suitable. Isabella blinked in surprise. Thank you for the opportunity. It's not a reward, Dr. Reyes. It's a test. Don't disappoint me. Word of the incident in the OR spread quickly through the surgical department. Some residents and attendings supported Isabella's decision, viewing it as appropriate action in a critical situation. Others saw it as a breach of protocol and hierarchy. Dr. Patterson's complaints to the residency director resulted in a formal review of Isabella's actions, though the outcome, influenced by the patient's successful recovery and Dr. Sterling's unexpected support, was ultimately in her favor. You're walking a fine line, Isabella, Professor Alcott told her over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. Now in his 70s, he had reduced his teaching load but remained a mentor to Isabella. Sterling's backing counts for a lot, but Patterson's family has endowed a wing of this hospital. So politics matters more than patient care? Isabella asked, frustration evident in her voice. Of course not, but pretending politics doesn't exist won't serve you or your patients. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You've always had to work harder than others to prove yourself. That hasn't changed even with doctor before your name. Isabella sighed, knowing he was right. Sometimes I wonder if it will ever change. It will, because of people like you. Professor Alcott smiled. You know, when you first started working here, Margaret Sterling told me I was wasting my time encouraging you. Said you'd never make it through medical school, let alone into surgery. Isabella raised her eyebrows. And now she assigns you to her most complex cases. Margaret doesn't do that lightly. The complex hepatectomy Dr. Sterling had mentioned proved to be just the first of many challenging surgeries where Isabella was requested as an assistant. Despite the continuing undercurrent of resentment from some colleagues, Isabella's technical skills and judgment were increasingly recognized and respected. By her 4th year of residency, she was being groomed for a hepatobiliary surgery fellowship, one of the most competitive subspecialties. Your hands are wasted on routine procedures, Dr. Sterling told her after they had successfully completed a particularly difficult liver resection. You should specialize. Isabella took this as the compliment it was intended to be. I've been thinking about hepatobiliary or transplant surgery. Good choices, though you'll find transplant programs even more political than what you've already experienced. It was the closest Dr. Sterling had ever come to acknowledging the barriers Isabella had faced and would continue to face in her career. I can handle politics, Isabella said with a small smile. I learned from the best. For the first time, Dr. Sterling's lips curved in a genuine smile. Indeed you did. As Isabella neared the end of her residency, she found herself increasingly involved in teaching junior residents and medical students. She took particular interest in mentoring students from backgrounds similar to her own. First-generation college graduates, children of immigrants, students from underrepresented groups. Dr. Reyes, do you have a minute? A first-year medical student, Elena Rodriguez, approached her after a teaching session on suturing techniques. Of course, what can I help you with? Elena hesitated. This might sound strange, but I heard about your story, how you started as maintenance staff here. Isabella nodded, unsurprised that this part of her history continued to follow her. That's right. I work as a nursing assistant to help pay for medical school, Elena said. Sometimes I feel out of place, like I don't belong here among people who've had every advantage. I know that feeling well, Isabella replied gently. But you do belong here, Elena. Medicine needs people with diverse experiences and perspectives. How did you deal with it? The doubt, the comments, Isabella considered the question. I focused on what I could control. My knowledge, my skills, my work ethic. The rest, well, I had to develop a thick skin. She smiled. And I found allies, people who saw my potential, not my background. Like Professor Alcott, yes, and eventually others, including surprisingly Dr. Sterling, though Isabella didn't mention this. Would you be willing to meet sometimes, to talk? Elena asked hesitantly. There aren't many faculty members who understand what it's like. I'd be happy to, Isabella said, feeling a sense of coming full circle. That's how change happens, one person at a time. The final test of Isabella's residency came unexpectedly, during what should have been a routine day in the OR. She and Dr. Sterling were scheduled to perform a complex biliary reconstruction on a patient with extensive scarring from previous surgeries. It was the kind of challenging case that had become their specialty as a team. As they were scrubbing in, Dr. Sterling seemed uncharacteristically pale. Are you all right, Dr. Sterling? Isabella asked. Perfectly fine, the older surgeon replied crisply. Let's proceed. In the operating room, everything began normally. Dr. Sterling made the initial incision with her usual precision, and Isabella assisted, anticipating her needs as they worked through layers of scar tissue to reach the damaged bile ducts. But an hour into the procedure, Isabella noticed something concerning. Dr. Sterling's hands were trembling slightly. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, but to someone who had worked alongside her for years, it was unmistakable. Would you like me to take over the dissection for a while, Dr. Sterling? Isabella offered carefully. I'm quite capable of performing my job, Dr. Reyes, came the sharp reply. Isabella didn't press the issue, but she remained vigilant, ready to step in if necessary. 20 minutes later, as Dr. Sterling was placing a delicate suture in the reconstructed bile duct, the tremor worsened suddenly. The needle slipped, nicking a small vessel. Suction, Dr. Sterling commanded, her voice betraying a hint of frustration. Blood began to obscure the surgical field. Dr. Sterling attempted to locate the bleeding vessel, but her movements seemed increasingly uncoordinated. Dr. Sterling, Isabella said quietly, let me assist with that dissection. For a moment, Dr. Sterling seemed about to refuse again. Then, to Isabella's surprise, she stepped back slightly. Very well, Dr. Reyes, proceed. Isabella smoothly took over, locating and ligating the bleeding vessel, then continuing with the delicate work of bile duct reconstruction. Throughout the remainder of the surgery, she and Dr. Sterling worked in a newly established rhythm, with Isabella performing the most technically demanding aspects, while Dr. Sterling directed and assisted. When the procedure was finally complete, Dr. Sterling left the OR abruptly, leaving Isabella to close and speak with the family. It was unprecedented. Dr. Sterling had never before left a surgery before its completion. Isabella found her later in her office, staring out the window at the hospital grounds below. "The patient is stable, Dr. Sterling. The reconstruction looks good. Thank you for the update." Dr. Sterling didn't turn around. "You performed well today, Dr. Sterling." "If I may," Isabella hesitated, venturing into territory she had never dared approach before. "Are you feeling all right?" There was a long silence. Then Dr. Sterling turned to face her, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Essential tremor," she said finally. "It's been progressing for the past year, usually controlled with medication, but occasionally unpredictable." Isabella nodded, understanding the implications immediately. For a surgeon, a tremor could be career-ending. "Have you told the department head?" "Not yet." Dr. Sterling's voice was tight. "I've been reluctant. I understand." And Isabella did understand. The fear of being seen as weak, of losing the respect of colleagues, of having to step back from the work that defined you. "Do you?" Dr. Sterling's eyes searched her face. "Perhaps you do, at that. You've faced your own challenges, different challenges," Isabella acknowledged. "But yes, I know what it's like to fear losing everything you've worked for." Dr. Sterling nodded slowly. "The irony doesn't escape me, you know. All those years, I questioned your place here, your abilities, and now you're the one stepping in to save my patient. We're a team," Isabella said simply. "That's what teams do." A ghost of a smile crossed Dr. Sterling's face. "I haven't always been a good teammate, have I?" "You've been an exceptional teacher," Isabella replied honestly. "Even when you were tough on me, especially then." Dr. Sterling seemed to consider this. "Perhaps, but I wasn't always fair." She stood straighter, some of her usual composure returning. "Well, Dr. Reyes, it seems I may need to adjust my role in the department in the coming months, and I find myself in need of a surgeon I can trust to take on some of my more complex cases." Isabella's heart quickened. "I'd be honored, Dr. Sterling." "It's not an honor, it's a necessity," Dr. Sterling said, though without her usual sharpness, "and it's not charity. You've earned it." She paused. "You've proven me wrong, Isabella. I didn't think someone from your background could succeed in this field. I'm glad to have been mistaken." It was the closest thing to an apology Isabella would ever receive, and more meaningful for it. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, using the older surgeon's first name for the first time. Dr. Sterling nodded. A silent acknowledgement of a relationship transformed. 5 years later, Isabella Reyes, Maryland, FAS, stood at the podium in the grand auditorium of Westridge Medical University, addressing the incoming class of medical students. As the newly appointed director of the Center for Surgical Excellence and associate professor of surgery, she had been asked to give the keynote address at the white coat ceremony. In the audience sat her family, her parents now retired, her siblings successful in their own careers, and her young nieces and nephews watching with wide eyes as their aunt addressed hundreds of future doctors. Professor Alcott, now well into his 80s but still sharp-minded, sat in a place of honor near the front, and beside him, using a cane but still commanding in her presence, sat Dr. Margaret Sterling, who had retired from surgery but continued to teach and mentor with undiminished intensity. "Today, as you receive your white coats," Isabella said to the eager faces before her, "you join a profession defined by both tradition and transformation. Medicine honors its history while constantly evolving to meet new challenges and embrace new voices." Her eyes scanned the diverse group of students, noting with satisfaction how different they looked from the homogeneous classes of years past. "Some of you come from families of physicians, carrying forward a legacy. Others are the first in your families to attend college, let alone medical school. Some have taken direct paths to this moment, while others have traveled routes as unique as your own stories." She smiled, remembering her own journey. 20 years ago, I stood in this building, not as a student, but as a member of the maintenance staff. I cleaned these halls, these classrooms, these laboratories. I watched students like you, and wondered if I could ever belong among them. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. The path from there to here was not easy. There were those who told me, directly or indirectly, that people like me didn't belong in medicine, that the barriers were too high, the obstacles too great. Isabella's gaze found Dr. Sterling, who met her eyes steadily. But I also found mentors who believed in me, who challenged me to be better than I thought I could be. Some of those mentors supported me from the beginning. She nodded toward Professor Alcott. Others taught me through resistance, making me prove myself again and again, until excellence became habit. Dr. Sterling's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. The white coat you received today is more than a uniform. It is a responsibility to your patients, to your colleagues, and to those who will follow in your footsteps. Medicine should be a meritocracy, where talent and dedication matter more than background or connections. But we all know that isn't always the reality. Isabella paused, looking out at the sea of faces. That's why each of you bears a dual responsibility to excel in your own right, and to help create a profession that truly values excellence from every source. To recognize that the next great surgeon, researcher, or clinician might come from anywhere, even from the person cleaning the floors when everyone else has gone home. After the ceremony, as students mingled with faculty and families, Isabella found herself approached by a small group of students who had sought her out specifically. "Dr. Reyes, your story is incredible," said a young woman with a Spanish accent. "I'm from a small town in New Mexico. People told me I should be practical, that medicine was for rich kids from the city. I heard similar things," Isabella replied with a smile. "What convinced you to try anyway?" "My grandmother. She always said, talent finds a way." "A wise woman, your grandmother." As the students moved away, Isabella felt a presence beside her. Dr. Sterling, leaning on her cane, observed the retreating students with a thoughtful expression. "You've become quite the inspiration, Isabella," she said. "I overheard no fewer than 5 students saying they want to specialize in surgery because of you." Isabella smiled. "I learned from the best even when the lessons were difficult, perhaps especially then." Dr. Sterling's eyes, still sharp despite her years, studied Isabella's face. "Do you remember what I told you during your residency interview, about medicine requiring more than knowledge, requiring judgment, poise under pressure?" "I remember. You've proven to have all those qualities in abundance." Dr. Sterling straightened, her voice taking on an official tone. "Which is why I've recommended you as my replacement as chief of surgery when I step down from the administrative position next year." Isabella stared at her in shock. "Margaret, I don't say you're not ready," Dr. Sterling interrupted. "You are. The department needs someone with both technical excellence and vision, someone who sees medicine not as it is, but as it should be." Before Isabella could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of Professor Alcott, accompanied by Isabella's parents. "Two of my favorite surgeons," he said with a warm smile. "Isabella, your parents were just telling me how proud they are. As am I." Isabella's mother embraced her, tears in her eyes. "Mia, if your abuelo could see you now, he'd say I talk too much in my speeches." Isabella laughed, wiping away a tear of her own. Her father, dignified in his best suit, simply took her hand. "You have done what many thought impossible, Isa, not just for yourself, but for all of us." As they stood there, a young woman in a maintenance uniform passed by, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. She glanced at the group, then quickly looked away, continuing her work. "Excuse me," Isabella said to her family, then walked over to the young woman. "Hello there." The woman looked up, surprised to be addressed by someone in a white coat. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Dr. Reyes. What's your name?" "Maria, ma'am. Maria Diaz. It's nice to meet you, Maria." Isabella smiled warmly. "I just wanted to say thank you for your work here. This place wouldn't function without people like you." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Reyes. Most people don't even notice us." "I notice," Isabella said softly. "I was once where you are now." "You were?" Maria looked skeptical. 20 years ago, I cleaned these same halls." Isabella reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever want to talk about educational opportunities here at Westridge, my door is always open." Maria took the card with a trembling hand. Thank you, doctor. I've been taking night classes at community college. Pre-nursing, that's wonderful. Keep going." Isabella squeezed her shoulder gently. "Dreams have a way of coming true, even when the path seems impossible." As Maria continued on her way, Isabella rejoined her family and colleagues, feeling a sense of completion that went beyond professional achievement. "What was that about?" Dr. Sterling asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Just coming full circle," Isabella replied, "and maybe helping someone else begin their journey." That evening, as twilight fell over the Westridge campus, Isabella took a moment alone to walk the corridors of the medical school. The same corridors she had once cleaned, then navigated as a student, and now walked as a faculty member and future chief of surgery. Outside the anatomy lab where Professor Alcott had first recognized her potential, she paused, remembering the frightened but determined young woman she had been. How far she had come, how many barriers she had broken, and yet she knew there was still more work to do, more students to mentor, more innovations to bring to surgery, more doors to open for those who would follow. From mop to scalpel, she murmured to herself, a smile playing on her lips. And beyond, Isabella Reyes had once been a shadow in these halls, invisible to most who passed her by. Now she cast a light that others could follow, not despite her background, but because of it. The journey had shaped her into exactly the physician, teacher, and leader she was meant to be. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass doors, a confident woman in a white coat, standing tall in a place where she had earned her right to belong. The end.